What if society treated women exactly like it treats men, starting tomorrow morning? Not in some abstract political way, not a manifesto, not a debate, just a Tuesday. A regular Tuesday where every social rule, every unspoken expectation, every invisible checkpoint that gets applied to women just stopped applying. And in its place, the same set of casual assumptions that men have been moving through the world with for generations. What actually changes? What stays the same? And maybe the more uncomfortable question, would it even feel like freedom? Or would it feel like something stranger than that? This channel exists to hand you the truth about human behavior that most people are too polite to say out loud. We've spent a lot of time on dynamics between people, the ugly, the honest, and the things nobody names at the dinner table. And this thought experiment might be the most illuminating one we've tackled yet. Not because it has a clean answer, but because of what it forces you to see on the way to one. Let's go all the way through it. Let's start somewhere small, almost boring, because that's where the most important stuff hides. Derek rolls out of bed on a Wednesday, pulls on whatever jeans were closest to the door, doesn't check a mirror, and walks into a coffee shop to get his morning order. Nobody in that shop runs a mental checklist on him. The barista doesn't form an opinion. The guy at the table nearby doesn't register him as anything other than another person in line. Derek is, for all practical purposes, invisible. And that invisibility is a gift he's never had to earn. Now, swap Derek for a woman named Solange. Same coffee shop, same Wednesday, same jogger and t-shirt energy. And something subtly shifts, not necessarily in what people say because nobody might say anything at all, but in the ambient social pressure that follows her in the door. There's a cultural script, absorbed through thousands of small moments growing up, that says a woman's appearance is something she's presenting to the world, whether she intends to or not. The audit is happening. Sometimes it's other people doing it. Often it's her doing it to herself, because the external message got internalized so early she can't remember learning it. Here's the part that most observers get wrong. They assume this only affects vain people, or people who care deeply about fashion, or some narrow category of image-conscious individuals. The research says otherwise. Psychologists who study objectification theory, particularly Barbara Fredrickson's work, found that this kind of habitual self-monitoring, what they call self-objectification, consumes measurable cognitive bandwidth. You're running a background process all the time, and that background process pulls from the same mental resources you use to solve problems, focus on conversations, and generate creative ideas. So, if you raise girls inside the same social environment, boys grow up in where showing up disheveled is just Tuesday, where nobody assigns meaning to whether your outfit communicates effort, where looking average carries zero social tax. You wouldn't just be making a change about appearance. You'd be freeing up mental real estate that's currently occupied by a process most people don't even realize is running. That's not a small thing. That's potentially thousands of hours across a lifetime, redirected from surveillance to creation. So, what do you actually do with this insight? Start noticing where appearance-based commentary sneaks into your daily language. The offhand remark about how someone looks tired. The compliment that's really an evaluation. These are small bricks in a wall that took decades to build, and they come down the same way they went up. One small moment at a time. Pay close attention here, because this one operates so fast that most people never catch it in real time. When Trevor speaks in a meeting, direct, no qualifiers, cuts to his point, people receive it as clarity, maybe even leadership. He doesn't preface it with, "Sorry if this sounds harsh," or "I might be wrong," but he just says the thing, and the room processes the content of what he said, not the manner of his saying it. Now, watch what happens when a woman named Adaze brings the same energy into the same type of meeting. Identical confidence level, identical directness. And here's where the social math breaks. The room often processes her delivery, before it processes her content. Is she being difficult? Is she having a rough morning? The how eclipses the what, and she knows it's doing that, which means she's now managing two conversations simultaneously. The actual topic and the invisible meta-conversation about how she's coming across. This is a cognitive and emotional load with no equivalent in the male version of that experience. And the reaction to that load is where it gets psychologically fascinating. When you learn, through repeated lived feedback, that your direct communication style creates friction that the same style doesn't create for your male counterpart, you adapt. You pad your statements. You soften your assertions. You front-load your ideas with disclaimers that essentially translate to, please don't hold my confidence against me. And then, here's the part nobody talks about. The people on the receiving end of all the qualifying will often interpret the hedging as uncertainty, as lack of conviction, as someone who doesn't fully believe what they're saying. The very adaptation created by the double standard ends up reinforcing the original stereotype. It's a closed loop that punishes both openness and caution. Now, run the alternate scenario. AD's grows up in an environment where her directness was received exactly the way Trevor's was. No invisible penalty for conviction. No social processing of tone before content. She would still be Adaisy, same intelligence, same insights. But she'd have 20 years of uninterrupted practice expressing them without the translation layer in between. The ideas would land differently, not because they changed, but because the static around them got removed. Think about what that means for every field where communication is the medium: medicine, law, education, every leadership environment in existence. The cost of the credibility gap isn't just personal, it's structural. We've been filtering signal through a layer of noise that we created ourselves and then called natural. There's a physical dimension to this conversation that people skip past too quickly, and it's worth slowing down for. Men, on the whole, are socially permitted to occupy space in a way that doesn't require justification. Nathaniel sits with his elbows out. He talks loudly across a restaurant when he's excited. He interrupts, not because he's rude necessarily, but because the social cost of interrupting is lower for him. He was never taught that his presence needs to be carefully rationed. He walks through a crowd and the crowd moves around him. This isn't about arrogance, it's about a default setting, a physical confidence that gets installed early through toys and playgrounds and coaches and every context that tells boys, the world is yours to move through. Take up the room. Go after the thing. Girls are frequently taught a different operating system. Take up less room. Be considerate of the space you occupy. Don't be too loud, too much, too present. And the word that enforces this most powerfully, the word that still functions like a social alarm system, is bossy. You will almost never hear a boy called bossy for the same behavior that gets a girl labeled with it. And you don't have to hear that word 1,000 times for it to work. You hear it twice at age 7 in the right context, and it's installed. Here's where this gets measurable, not just philosophical. Research from Hewlett-Packard, widely cited in behavioral economics, found that men tend to apply for roles when they meet roughly 60% of the listed qualifications. Women, on average, wait until they hit close to 100%. That's not a confidence gap in any simple sense. That's a learned behavior about whether or not you have permission to reach for something before you're completely certain you deserve it. Now, imagine that number flips. Imagine women move through job markets, negotiations, creative opportunities, and social environments with the same base assumption men operate from. That showing up slightly underqualified is just called ambition, and you figure the rest out on the way. The talent was never the issue. The permission to act on it without waiting for certainty. That's the variable that was different. So, what do? If you manage people, pay attention to who raises their hand before they feel fully ready and who waits for an invitation. And ask yourself honestly, are you unconsciously Giving one group a longer runway? You probably are. Most of us are. The fix starts with that honest look. This section cuts in a direction nobody expects, and that's exactly why it matters. In our imagined world of total equal treatment, one thing changes that most people in this conversation never bring up. The accountability standard shifts. Here's what that means in practice. When Garrett makes a bad financial call, nobody soft pedals it. He owns it. He explains it to people who are affected by it. He carries the weight of it without a cushion being slipped underneath the consequence. And while that's hard, genuinely hard, it also communicates something underneath the hardness. I believe you are a full adult who made a real decision, and I believe you can survive the weight of being wrong. Now, contrast that with how bad decisions get processed when the decision maker is a woman. Sometimes, not always, but enough to be a pattern. There's a reflex to provide a soft landing, to attribute the failure to circumstances, to bad advice she was probably too trusting to question, to a system that was stacked against her before she started. Some of that is legitimate, but some of it is a subtler message in disguise. We didn't fully expect you to succeed anyway, so the failure doesn't entirely count. That quiet condescension wears the outfit of compassion. It feels supportive on the surface, but underneath it is the structural assumption of limited agency, which is maybe the most disrespectful thing you can communicate to another adult while maintaining a sympathetic expression. Psychologists who study self-efficacy, the internal belief that you can affect outcomes through your own actions, consistently find that people who are protected from the full weight of consequences often develop weaker long-term confidence than those who are held to a straight, clear standard. Because surviving a hard consequence is one of the most powerful, confidence-building experiences a person can have. If you never get to survive it because someone kept intercepting the fall, you never get the data that says, I can handle this. The equal treatment version isn't harsher. It's more respectful. It says, your choices matter, your failures are real, and you are fully capable of facing them. That's not punishment. That's the thing you say to someone you actually believe in. Here's something that surprises people when they sit with it long enough. Men in this conversation are often framed as the ones who have it easier. And in many of the sections above, there's truth in that. But the emotional permission question is one of the places where the male default carries its own serious cost. And a truly equal world would change things for everyone, not just women. The dominant male social script around emotion is essentially stillness equals strength. Keep it contained. Process privately. And if something does move you publicly, it had better be fury or enthusiasm, because those are acceptable outputs. Grief, fear, confusion, tenderness expressed openly. Those get complicated fast. Elliot loses his job, and the people around him ask how the job search is going, because that's the actionable version of the problem, the one where he can perform competence. Nobody sits with him in the feeling of it, because the feeling of it is somewhere nobody knows how to go with a man. Women, by contrast, have been extended much more social permission around emotional expression. Between friends, in relationships, in casual conversation. That has real value. The ability to name what you're going through and have it witnessed without it becoming a credibility issue is psychologically significant in ways that compound over time. A truly equal social structure would probably not look like women inheriting the male emotional script. It would look more like the female permission getting extended both directions. Men given the room to say, I'm struggling without losing standing. Women given the room to say, I disagree without losing warmth. Both pools of people would benefit from each other's defaults, and the relationships that formed inside that structure, friendships, partnerships, families, would be functionally different. Not because people changed, but because the rules they were playing by finally allowed them to be honest. We have been inside this thought experiment long enough now to see its real shape, and here's what's sitting underneath all of it. The point was never that men have it perfectly, and women should just inherit what they have. The male default carries its own ceiling: emotional suppression, accountability without support, a pressure to project confidence even when you're completely underwater. Those are real limitations. They shape men's lives in ways that cost them too. The point of the experiment is that running two different sets of social rules simultaneously, one for men, one for women, doesn't just create inequality between those groups. It creates a narrowed version of what every human being gets to be. It takes the full range of possible human expression and cuts it down to two prescribed channels, neither of which contains everything people actually need to function at their best. When Solange can't walk into a room without running the appearance audit, she loses something. When Elliot can't name his fear without it reading as weakness, he loses something too. And when Addis's directness gets filtered through a credibility tax that Trevor never pays, well, the room loses something. It lost the idea before it ever landed. The version of the world that actually serves people well doesn't pick one set of rules and hand them to everyone. It takes what works from both and builds something wider. More room for directness and warmth. More room for accountability and support. More room to show up exactly as prepared as you are, without waiting for a permission slip that only some people were given at birth. That's not a radical idea. It's just what happens when you follow the thought experiment honestly to where it ends. Most people stop the conversation before it gets here, because getting here requires admitting that almost everyone has been playing inside constraints they didn't build, didn't choose, and largely never examined. But you examine them just now, and that's not a small thing. Start there.